The attacks in Paris and their links to this region, like the downing of the Russian plane in Sinai, recent bombings in Ankara and Beirut, and the massive flow of refugees, all of which are being discussed this week at the G20 summit in Turkey, underscore what a period of turmoil the Middle East is going through. And that turmoil, in turn, underscores the strategic importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, a bond of two allies with common interests facing an array of dangers that threaten us both, buttressed by the democratic values we share, but which struggle to take hold and indeed are under assault across this region. This context formed the backdrop of President Obama's meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu last week in Washington, which I returned to the United States to take part in. The backdrop of this meeting also featured a year that was not an easy one for our bilateral relationship, given the disagreement we had on the Iran nuclear deal. But while neither leader denied those differences, there was no rehashing them either in this meeting. Both leaders took a forward-looking approach and used their meeting as an opportunity to resume their serious and focused cooperation on a wide range of shared security interests. It also provided an opportunity to signal to both publics, not to mention the wider international community, that the relationship remains unshakable and resolute even when we have policy disagreements. That's a critical message in this dangerous period. Much has been written about this relationship, about the relationship between the two leaders. There have been real policy differences between our governments during their terms, not unprecedented in U.S.-Israel relationships, and real differences between the leaders themselves, also not unprecedented in this relationship. Now, those differences were fair game for public reporting, although some accounts, in my view, sought to accentuate discord and exaggerated personal drama, when in fact it's strategic cooperation and the convergence of our interests that have had a greater impact on the relationship. And I believe that over the long term, history will be kinder to these two leaders in terms of acknowledging what they achieved together than what sometimes comes across in the day-to-day media coverage and the political environment in both countries. Last week's meeting was serious and constructive and addressed some of the most critical issues in our relationship, which I will touch on: Iran and our cooperation on regional threats, U.S. security assistance, and the recent violence and the Palestinian track. Thank you. Last week's visit was an important opportunity for President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss the implementation of the Iran nuclear agreement. As is well known, while we share an identical strategic objective, preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, we differed on the best way to do so. We believe strongly that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a very good deal that will keep Iran farther away from a nuclear weapon for a longer period of time, with greater transparency and ability to respond to cheating than any other alternative. The Prime Minister, of course, disagreed and felt that it was not a good deal. But with the congressional review now behind us, the agreement is moving forward toward implementation. Iran has a long list of steps it must take to downgrade its nuclear program before it will receive a single dollar of sanctions relief. These include removing thousands of centrifuges from Natanz and Fordow, disposing of its stockpile of enriched uranium, disabling its heavy water reactor at Arak, addressing the possible past military dimension of its nuclear program, and setting up a highly intrusive system of inspections and monitoring. All of these steps must be certified by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And together, they will block every path Iran could take to a nuclear weapon during the term of the agreement and likely well beyond. Now, our focus is on enforcement at this point, monitoring and verification. The President and the Prime Minister agreed on the importance of holding Iran's feet to the fire to ensure Iran fully complies with its obligations in the agreement. And thanks to the intensive dialogue between American and Israeli experts over many years, Israeli input helped shape the conceptual and technical aspects of the nuclear agreement. Now we look forward to further Israeli input on the monitoring and compliance process. Now, as part of that dialogue, we will naturally talk about non-compliance scenarios. Should Iran be judged to be in violation of the agreement, as Vice President Biden said last week, our options include partial or full snapback of sanctions and even the use of military force, thanks to a credible military option which we maintain and which is available. We simply will not permit Iran, said the Vice President, to acquire nuclear weapons, period. The two leaders in Washington also discussed ways to intensify our cooperation on the non-nuclear threats posed by Iran, which are not covered by the JCPOA and which continue. These threats include Iran's destabilization of countries across the Middle East, its involvement in the civil war in Syria, its arming of terrorist proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, and its running its own terrorist networks. We will continue to work with Israel to deploy the full range of our tools, from intelligence sharing to interdiction of weapons transfers, to sanctions and designations against terrorist entities to combat these threats. We're using many of the same tools to work with Israel to ensure its security is protected from many of the other threats in the region, the ones that don't emanate from Iran, including terrorist groups like ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra, spillover violence from the war in Syria, and instability in Israel's neighbors. In the diplomatic process that is underway in Vienna, which we hope will lead to a ceasefire and a political transition in Syria, we are very mindful of Israel's interests in outcomes in Syria, and we will work to protect them. Now, in view of this dangerous regional environment, it's appropriate, as the President and the Prime Minister agreed, to resume our talks on a new long-term memorandum of understanding on American military assistance to Israel. During President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu's tenure, it is widely acknowledged that security cooperation between our countries has reached unprecedented heights. It includes our $3 billion in annual military assistance, an additional over $1 billion in support of Iron Dome with life-saving results, hundreds of millions more for David Sling and Arrow 3 missile defense programs, extensive joint military training, expanded intelligence sharing, and many other areas, some of which are not made public. Now we are preparing to take the next step in our relationship. In December, senior delegations from both sides will meet to begin these discussions. It is a complex exercise that involves achieving a common understanding of the threat environment and matching capabilities and systems that are most relevant to those threats. Along the way, Israel will have some significant decisions to make about how to prioritize different systems in its long-term acquisition planning, and we will all have to take account of budget realities in both countries. At this point, before we've even had those discussions, it is premature to talk about numbers. We know that some systems, like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, will be part of the package. It is the most sophisticated fighter aircraft in the world, and it will be the backbone of the Israeli Air Force for the next generation. Israel will be the only air force in the Middle East to fly it, starting with the first arrivals 13 months from now. But even on this system, Israel has important decisions still to make about quantities, timing, and system characteristics. These talks will be undergirded by America's bedrock commitment to Israel's qualitative military edge, which is crucial to Israel's ability to defend itself by itself. QME, qualitative military edge, may be the most important three letters in English for Israeli defense planners, and it's also fully embraced by the American officials charged with managing the bilateral relationship. The commitment is long-standing and nonpartisan, and it is delinked from any particular policy preference. I also expect this new dialogue will be part of a broader discussion of defense cooperation in ways in which we can further protect and promote each other's interests in an increasingly unstable strategic environment, including cyber, intelligence, and counter-tunneling technology. Finally, let me address the two leaders' discussion on the recent wave of violence and terrorism that began several weeks ago, starting with tensions at Jerusalem's holy sites. On this issue, I want to reinforce President Obama's expression of solidarity with the Israeli people as they continue to face Palestinian terrorism and violence against innocent citizens. There is no excuse, no justification, and no explaining away terrorism. We condemn it in the strongest terms, including the incitement by Palestinian leaders that often stands behind it. As Israel mourns the murder of so many of its citizens, most recently Rabbi Yaakov Littman, Zichrono Livracha, and his son Natanel Littman, Zichrono Livracha, who were gunned down just before Shabbat, and praised for the recovery of dozens more, a list that includes American citizens, America's leaders and countless other Americans stand in solidarity with you, a similar solidarity to that which we feel for France during these dark days. With Israel, just as with France, America's condemnation, our total rejection of terror, whether in the form of rocks, knives, motor vehicles, guns, suicide bombers, or rockets, is unequivocal and rooted in the kinship of our open and democratic societies. As President Obama said alongside the Prime Minister on Monday, the United States supports Israel's right to maintain basic law and order and protect its citizens. It is my strong belief, the President said, that Israel has not just the right, but the obligation to protect itself. All sides are hurting in the current reality, which is why President Obama reiterated America's commitment to assisting Israelis and Palestinians in finding durable solutions to the current crisis and restoring security. Secretary Kerry undertook that effort in meetings in Berlin and Amman last month, and he met on Wednesday with the Prime Minister in Washington to follow up on the discussion with the President and explore affirmative steps the parties can take to restore calm. President Obama also focused part of last week's meeting on getting back on a path toward a two states for two peoples solution. Legitimate Palestinian aspirations, he said, must be met through a political process. We recognize that we will not see a two-state solution during President Obama's administration, and it may be that we are in a period in which it will not even be possible to conduct negotiations. Nevertheless, even in such a period, we firmly believe that it is imperative to take steps now to preserve the two-state solution as a viable outcome, to keep it alive as a realistic prospect. Otherwise, we risk sliding toward a binational reality. That outcome, in which Israel loses either its Jewish or its democratic character, and Palestinians do not achieve their dream of independence, is an outcome neither Israelis nor Palestinians want. But it will become increasingly likely if the current political stalemate persists. So we are urging both sides to consider seriously what steps they can take, even in the absence of negotiations, that are consistent with the transition to two states envisioned by previous agreements, and at least provide some momentum in that direction until the next negotiations can take place. Our acting special envoy, Frank Lowenstein, will be in the region soon to address these issues. In our ongoing dialogue with all sides, we will continue to discourage unilateral actions that damage the prospects of renewing and successfully completing negotiations for two states. Such actions include Palestinian appeals to the ICC and UN bodies, and Israeli settlement expansion and home demolitions. We are also in regular contact with the Israeli government about action it is taking to combat extremism, including the homegrown variety, and the importance of bringing to justice those responsible for such horrifying terrorist attacks as the arson in Duma that took the lives of 3 members of the Dawabsha family during the summer. We are deeply aware that previous failed attempts to achieve a negotiated two-state solution make progress much more difficult. The mistrust between leaders and peoples runs deep, and many feel the cause is hopeless. Nevertheless, we also believe that real progress was achieved in previous efforts, including the 2013-2014 negotiations, and there is a foundation on which to build when conditions are ripe. But in the meantime, the clock is ticking toward the day when Israelis and Palestinians cannot disentangle themselves from their binational reality. Leaders who wish to avoid that future and who aspire to seize potential regional security and economic benefits of the end of the conflict must think creatively and proactively about how to prevent that reality and steer back in the direction of a two-states for two-people solution that ends the conflict. The Prime Minister's visit allowed him and the President to engage in productive work to advance our joint interests, and their teams will carry that work forward in the days ahead. Next month, President Obama looks forward to welcoming President Rivlin to the White House, further underscoring the close bonds between our peoples. President Rivlin has demonstrated extraordinary courage and leadership in combating extremism, promoting tolerance and mutual understanding, and standing up for democratic values at a particularly challenging time in Israel. I know President Obama looks forward to discussing these issues with him and sharing some latkes with him at the White House's annual Hanukkah reception. So there you have it. The state of our unique alliance is strong, and there is a robust agenda to tackle over the next year and beyond. In the months ahead, there will be debates on all the issues I've discussed, and there will be a need, no less than before, for robust public discourse, as your profession enables. And for this, the Israeli public will continue to rely on your reporting, your commitment to truth and transparency, and your commitment to highlight the viewpoints of all stakeholders. And so will my colleagues and I. Thank you very much.